Hi, my name is David Dvorkin, better known as Dave. I was born October the 12th, 1914 in Sioux City, Iowa. My mother's name was Ida Dvorkin. My father's name was Louis. And we lived uh, in many different homes in Sioux City. I come from a family of 9 children. There were 5 boys and 4 girls. And as of today, out of the 9, I have a younger sister, and I say she's younger. Uh, she's only 88, and she and I are the only 2 left out of the family. We were a very close-knit family. Uh, we didn't have a lot, but what we did have was each other. Uh, my mother and father are both from Russia. Actually, my mother was a neighbor of Mrs. B in the old country. And my dad came from a little town called Registev, I think, or something to that effect. And when she came over, she brought with her, there were 2 daughters, I said 2 of my sisters, and 3 of my brothers. Excuse me. I was the first one born in this country.
Dave, what was your mother's maiden name?
My mother's maiden name was Kaplan, Ida Kaplan. And they had a time getting over here. But it's the deal with her family. There were 7 in her family. And as we all know what happened those years, one would send for the second one, and he would send for the third one, and so on, until all the brothers and sisters were here. Even my grandmother came with them, and by that time my grandfather had been deceased, and for some reason they all settled in Sioux City. And
Was there any reason why they settled in Sioux City? Was there any relatives there?
There were no relatives here at the time. I believe that 2 of my uncles, some reason, came to Sioux City and opened a business, and then little by little they sent for the rest of them. And we had such a great family in Sioux City. We had so many family picnics, as I recall. A park, Riverside Park, in Sioux City that we used to gather every year. And the Kaplan family, I say the Kaplan family, almost ran the park over. There were so many children, but we had a great time. And even during the Depression, we managed to stay together. And little by little, my brothers and sisters left the so-called nest, and finally wound up where there were only 5 of us left at our home, and we managed. We had, if I recall, we had 1 bathroom with 5 kids and 2 grown-ups, and it was a chore, but we managed. And the money wasn't plentiful, but we never went hungry. We always had a roof over our head. And as time went on, one after other left home. I went to Hopkins grade school in Sioux City, then to West Junior High School, and from there to Central High School in Sioux City, which we called the Castle on the Hill. I did fairly well in school. One exception. In the 11th grade, Latin was compulsory, and it was one language I just could not understand. I loved history, I loved English, I loved math. Latin I just couldn't get hold of it. And I was told by the teacher that she was going to flunk me at the end of the semester, and I would have to take it over again. And I decided I was not going to take another season of it. And I had to work on my mother because she was really the boss of the family. And she said, if you quit school, you're going to have to go to work. And I said, that's fine. And so I never graduated high school. But one thing I did love and always have was reading. And my father liked reading, mostly Western magazines. So as far as the language was concerned, I was not worried about D's, dem, and do's. And I had two older brothers at the time was working at a Jewish bakery in Sioux City. And the owner was, we used to call him Old Man Lazarowitz. And so I went to work at the bakery and put three brothers there. It was rough work, but we managed to get through it. And as the years went by, I'm trying to remember now exactly how it happened. But one of my sisters, at the time lived here in Omaha, and her husband worked for Forbes Bakery on 24th in Miami. And my brother-in-law came into Sioux City one day with Izzy Forbes and called me and asked me to meet them at the Martin Hotel. And I did meet at the hotel, and we talked a while, and Mr. Forbes said he'd like to have me come to work for him here in Omaha because we made a loaf of bread in Sioux City called Milwaukee Rye, which was great. I haven't seen anything like it since. And talked for a while, and he offered me a job. I'm getting ahead of myself. Visiting my sister and brother-in-law here in Omaha once in a while, and we used to come down here with my dad, my mother, and a couple of other kids in a Model T Ford. And it was an experience, if you can recall, coming on the old highway.
How long did that trip take?
We used to stop in Ottawa, which wasn't very far from Sioux City, for lunch. And I would guess it took about 5 or 6 hours at least to drive the distance. And we got acquainted with some people here in Omaha, just acquaintances. And then we go back to Sioux City. And then as I grew a little older, I think I was about 20, I came by myself. And as usual, my sister and brother-in-law were going to fix me up with somebody. And they did with one or two young ladies, and just wasn't what appealed to me too much. And finally, they introduced me to a young lady named Jean Glazer. And we went out a few times, and then I left. And I got back to Sioux City, and talking with a cousin of mine also named Dave, which was a common name in my family. And he was getting ready to be married. And I said, I met a young lady. And I said, I think I'm going to marry her. And she said, I knew her for a week. And I said, yes. Well, then call her up and ask her. And I did. he let me use his phone, and I called her, and I asked her if she would marry me, and surprised me, she said yes. And that lasted not only for the year we were engaged to be married, but for almost 68 years.
Dave, let's go back. I want to hear about your grandmother that you mentioned came over.
Not really well. As I can recall my grandmother, and I have a picture here of my grandmother and my aunt. It's up over my head, where she's wearing, I guess it's a shawl. And the children, the grandchildren, when they saw the picture, the first thing they want to know, who's the Indian lady? Because with the shawl, it looks just like she has long black hair. And in those years, you know, they never smiled when they took a snapshot or a photograph. And she had, as I recall, some kind of a lung disease. And at her age, I recall her sitting smoking cigarettes and coughing. And she never had too much to say, but she lived with my one of my aunts, and another aunt and uncle lived next door. And as I recall, and I'm sure of it, my grandfather, although I never knew him, outside of the picture, my grandmother was his fifth wife. And I don't know what the score was, but evidently he must have been okay when he hit the fifth one, because they all did seem to do well. And she came over with some of the other family.
Do you remember what year your parents came to this country?
Well, as I say, I was born in 1914, so it had to be around 1912 or 13, because in my family, it sounds strange to say, the 9 children, everyone was just 2 years apart. As a matter of fact, there was 3 or 4 of us had the October birthday. And my being the first one born in this country, I must have meant they were here in 1912 or 13. And the 2 uncles I had here at the time I had the Pioneer Iron Works in Sioux City. And one of their accomplishments for the iron railing along around the Sergeant Floyd monument in Sioux City. And as I said before, we were great. It was such a great camaraderie. We saw each other very, very often. And I can recall when we worked at the bakery in Sioux City, and of course we made the old-fashioned boiled bagel. And every Sunday, my Uncle Abe and Uncle Ben used to come in to the bakery for their Sunday bagel. And if they weren't to their liking, they let us know. And we had great times together. It wasn't much, but it was plenty.
How was a mealtime with the family when you had all the children at home and your parents?
Well, like all other people that came over from Russia, for instance, my mother was a great cook. And it's amazing how they made things stretch. There's the old joke about coming home and saying, "Mom, I invited Joey for supper." And say, "Okay, we'll put another glass of water in the soup." But as I say, there was always plenty to eat. And a matter of fact, when it came to things like kishka and helzel, chopped liver, I mean, she was so great at it. And to this day, my sister still makes gefilte fish and the chopped liver like my mother made. And that's one of the things I miss so much because I never got it again.
What are your memories of just a family dinner, everybody sitting down?
Uh, well, when we were kids, it was kind of a, I don't know how you came, uh, except for Shabbos, that you'd sit down and you'd feed your plate and then you get up and leave, and whoever was not at the table sat down then and finished. There wasn't a lot of riot or anything. The only thing with that many children in the family until they started to leave was the bathing facilities. When we finished up and had about still 5 children at home or so, and my dad and my mother, bathroom was kind of tough because one bathroom didn't much do. It reminds me of when I came here to the home, and the first time I had a female lady give me a bath, and she said, "Haven't you ever been bathed by a female before?" And I said, "No, not since my mother bathed me in the tub in the sink." And that's the way things were in those days. But we made do. We did the best we could, and it was great.
What kind of work did your dad do when he first came to this country?
My dad was a carpenter when he came over, and he I don't think he had a problem with one of his legs, and after a period of time, it was hard to find work as a carpenter, and he went to work then for the Sioux City stockyards, and his job was to separate the cattle and that from pen to pen, and he was with them for many years. And then when the Depression came along, they started to let help go, especially those over, I think it was 55 years of age. And there wasn't much then for him to do, but he had an old Model T Ford, and he decided what was best for him, and used to go down to the wholesale market in Sioux City, and he would stock up on apples and oranges, candy bars. Excuse me. And then he filled a couple of baskets, and he went back to the stockyards. And then he would go into the pens and sell these things to his friends. And he did that for several years until the people had the concession at the stockyards were a little bit upset by the fact that he was doing the business, and they banned him then from the stockyards. And that finished really his working years. And he was a gentleman. He was really a gentleman. And he was the Casper milk toast type, I think. And my mother was really the boss in the family. But she was great. She could cook, and she took care of the kids. As a matter of fact, from the way I got the information, that after I was born, 2 days later, she was back at the butcher shop across the street. And I think she used to flick chickens for 5 cents a head to help the income into the house. And she was very, very active in the 2 Orthodox synagogues on the west side. Matter of fact, she took charge of their dinners. Now I suppose you'd call them the head cook. And she knew what she was doing, and they did what she wanted them to do. They see her coming down the street. If they had anything to say to her, they better be very gentle, because she took nothing from anybody. I guess I must tell you the story about the ring around the neck. One thing I hated was taking a bath. And, of course, when the others were using the bathroom, then they used to use the kitchen sink. And as I recall, I sat there one day, washed my hands and my face, and when I got to my ears, that's about where it stopped. And my sister still makes fun of me to this day that I used to turn around to her and say, do I have a ring around my neck? And she still tells people about that. Because although back to the ears I was clean, back behind the ears I wasn't clean. And my children still get a kick out of that one. But another thing was a few years later, I must have been about 15, maybe 16. There was a family living behind us, the house behind us, that had a car. I don't remember what kind it was, but anyway, father was having trouble with his son and told him he was going to get rid of the car. And true to his word, he decided to sell it. And as my older brother Matt and I were getting a little older, she bought the car for the two of us and put it in the garage behind our house. We came out one day and the lock was busted. The car was gone. And come to find out that Joe's son busted the lock and took the car out. Said the car was his. But anyway, to make a long story short, they were so later were working at the bakery, and two detectives came back, and told me and my brother Matt, take our aprons off and come with them. What happened? Well, we were arrested for stealing the car. And they took us to the lockup. They took us to jail. And our boss's son came down and got us out. Well, they were having a trial. And as it turned out, I didn't have to appear in court. The lawyers handled it out, handled the whole thing. And when they got talking to Charlie, his last name was Arder, and he kept screaming how the car was his, even if his father sold it. And the judge finally turned around and just lammed into him. And of course he dismissed everything, but still in all, it was quite an experience. Never will forget it. Or I guess I did forget it, but it was strange being in jail. And from then on, we had a problem with the car because both my brother and I were using it, and I'd put $1 worth of gas in the car. And when it came his turn to use it, 9 times out of 10, he would use it and not put any gas in the car. So we got to where we decided I didn't want any more of the car. And that's the story about that.
Back then, gas had to be pretty inexpensive compared to today.
It was. I have to admit, I was a pretty heavy smoker. And we used to have the drivers, when they loaded their trucks, to go over to South Sioux City, Nebraska, to bring back cigarettes. We'd give them a quarter to bring back 2 packages of cigarettes. So you imagine what that did, what that was compared to what it is today. And bread was what, 5 cents a loaf, or 10 cents a loaf at the most. I mean, the prices today, we look back at it, it's ridiculous.
I want to hear more, Dave, about what your job was specifically at that bakery.
My job, we started what we call greasing pans. In other words, all the bread that was baked in a pan, you stood there with a swab, and of course, those years we used like Missoula, and cleaned the pans out, and then wipe them with the oil so that the breads would dump out. And from that time on, then you go up a little bit where they let you work on a table to form the loaves of bread. And then you could be an oven man. You could put the bread in the oven. And you just advance little by little as you learned a little more about it. We made, today they call them Kaiser rolls. We call them crown rolls. And no easy trick making it by hand. My older brother was a whiz. I never really got the hang of it. But when it came to forming loaves of bread by hand, we could do that very easily. And everything was oven baked as far as the rye breads were concerned. And brick ovens, and used what we call peels, a long pole. Well, today what they used to bake pizzas in and out was a small sample of it. These poles were 10 to 15 feet long that you put the bread on, put them in the oven, and then when baked you would take them back out. And there's nothing like the old brick ovens. And even today, I find it hard to find a loaf of rye bread that I myself would like to call rye bread, because they're not made that way. The bagel were all boiled, and that's what's good, the boiled bagel. And those are hard to find. And it was nothing to carry 100-pound bags of flour up a short 3 or 4 steps to dump in the mixer when you made your bread, when you made your dough. And you got muscles, believe me, you got muscles out of that. And I think after I left the city and my older brother left the bakery, my younger brother Nate was still there. And he was there for years. And I think up until he retired, that was the only job he ever had, was working in the bakery. But he had a great group of guys, and we used to get together at night, especially when we worked, and we'd chip in a nickel apiece, maybe get 30, 40 cents. And one of us would go over to Merkin's grocery store and come back with some meat and a few other things worth 40, 50 cents. Put them on a pep, put them in the oven, and get them hot. And that's, we had our dinner. We never carried a lunch pail. And that was enough to feed 5 or 6 of us at that time.
Did you start work early in the morning at the bakery?
No. At the Sioux City Bakery, it was mostly nights. And we'd get off in the morning, and 3 or 4 of us then would go up to the YMCA. We'd play a handball because we didn't have to pay anything. And as we got a little older, we used to go out and play 9 holes of golf early in the morning, and then go back home, go to bed. And that was our day. Get up, have a bite to eat. First thing you know, it's time to go back to work again. But it didn't seem like too much of a chore.
Now, you were working at the bakery when you moved to Omaha, is that correct?
I was working at the bakery then, and really I didn't want to move. I talked to the boss at that time, told him what the story was, and I said, I had been offered $25 a week, which was pretty good money. And I said, I don't really want to go. I said, but if you want to, meet the price, I'll stay here. And he said, no, he said, I can't do that. So I said, fine. And then when I talked to Jean, who wasn't my wife yet, she said, I don't want to move to Sioux City. I said, why? She said, you've got too much family here, which was true. And so after a period of time, not too long, I left Sioux City and came to Omaha and went to work for Forbes. And at that time I boarded with my brother-in-law's family, which was not too far away. And that was also night work. And it's funny because problems they're having today, I never had them. I used to walk home in the middle of the night and never worried about it. Before my wife and I were married, and she lived at 19th and Lake, and many times I got off work and I'd walk from 24th and Miami over to 19th and Lake, and she'd come out and we'd sit over on the steps of Lake School for an hour or so, and then she'd go back to bed and I went back to my pad, and we continued that for quite a while. And I worked for Forbes. It wasn't too long, maybe about a year or so, and he declared bankruptcy. And by that time, my wife and I had married, and it just wasn't, how should I put it, it wasn't comfortable at all. She was working at Woolworths downtown, and we were living with my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law and my brother-in-law. It was quite a good-sized apartment upstairs in this house, and that meant then until we get some settlement, because Forbes owed all of us a little back wages, and until we can get it settled, it was a little bit rough, and I started looking for another job. Now, my oldest sister was named Dora, and Dora married a fellow named Abe Mason. And they were married, as a matter of fact, my wife and I were at their 50th wedding anniversary in Richmond, California, and they had one son, Donald, called him Don, and unfortunately he passed away a few years back, and he was married and had 2 children, and after my brother-in-law and sister passed away, we kept in touch with Don for years. And then after he passed away, we kept in touch with his wife, Jean, and after a period of time, that kind of went away. We hadn't heard from her, and I don't know whether she's still with us or not. That's the remnants of the cold. And then there was my brother Max, and Max married Frances Matz, and they had 2 children, Larry and I don't recall the daughter's name, Marcia, and unfortunately, they're all gone. And after Matt came, my brother Sam, and they called him Larry. Years ago, there was a silent movie star named Larry Seaman, and for some reason, Sam reminded everybody of Larry, and they called him that. That was his nickname for the rest of his life. As a matter of fact, I have to tell because it's funny in a way. Meyer Morrison and Eve built a new home here in Omaha years ago, and they were inviting people over for an open house. Eve called me one day and she said, "Dave, we want to invite your brother to the open house, but we can't find his name, even though he worked for them at the grocery store." And I said, "Well, his name's Sam. It's in the phone book." She said, "I thought his name was Larry." Everybody thought that. And Larry married, I can't think of her name now, Millie. Millie had been married and divorced and had one child, and they were together for many years, and of course they're both gone now. And then after Larry came my sister Sophie, who had her name changed to Sue. Sue married Meyer Levy, and they had a son, Robert, who we all call Bob or Bobby. And Bobby, we still keep him, so he was just here not too long ago, and we spent some time together. He wound up quite was quite an intelligent job with Hewlett Packard before he retired. And Bob is married to June, a wonderful, wonderful girl. And we still keep in touch. And then after Sue came my brother Matthew, or Matt as we called him, which leads us to another story. Matt's Hebrew name was Matas Koppel. And my sister couldn't say couple, so she called him Puppy. And the name stuck for the rest of his life. And he worked at the bakery, as I said before. And one time I was going out the doors after he was married, and one of the girls who worked on the outside in the office said something about the fact that she had called when somebody wanted to talk to Matt. And she said, "I don't know anybody named Matt." And I said, "That's my brother." I said, "Oh," she said, "I thought his name was Puppy." And that was his name for his nickname until his wife, whose name was Olive. And they had a girl and two boys. And after he got to the point where he was an office manager for my brother-in-law, who had a business in Sioux City, his wife insisted we call him Matt. But he was still Puppy. And then after Matt, of course, it was my turn, and I've got two lousy daughters, Lois and Marilyn. I wish everybody could be as blessed as I have been with those two. And Lois has 3 daughters, and Marilyn has 2 sons, Mark and Mitchell, and Lois is Randy, Robin, and Ricky. And after that bunch comes my sister Eve, and Eve had 2 daughters. My brother Nate comes after me, and Nate married that wife named Ruby. Got 3 sons and a daughter, and we're still quite close with one of the boys who still lives in Sioux City. And then after Nate became Eve, and she's the sister that's still, thank God, with us. And she had 2 daughters, and unfortunately, one daughter died quite young, and our second one is still with us, and we're still quite close to one another. Then the youngest one was my sister Claire. What a beautiful girl. And she, during World War II, was in the Marine Corps. And she and her husband Jerry, after the war, moved to California, where she came ill and passed away quite young. And that was the original family. My brother Max was quite a guy, a little mixed up, but quite a guy. During the years of Prohibition, he worked for a bootlegger in Fort Dodge, Iowa. And he used to drive into Sioux City to see us, and his big Auburn car, which was a luxury car. And at the time he was married to a non-Jewish female, and after he visited us, he would go back to Fort Dodge, and one day he was picked up carrying alcohol and was given a short term, I don't know, a year or so in jail. He came out to find out his apartment, all his furniture, and his wife were gone. And that didn't bother him. He had quite a personality. He was lame in one leg from polio, but he got around great. And he married Frances, moved to California, and then they opened a dress shop, which he did very well, and got to the point where they had the cars with the excuse me, the cars with the license plates. I'm trying to think of the name of the dress shop. Anyway, it was 1, 2, 3, whatever it was. He used to have his hair done by a hairdresser, poofed up and everything. And I can't tell you about his wife, because if I tell you about his wife, I would think we were a bunch of goofs. But anyhow, got to a point where he was having a problem with his children and his grandchildren. The dress shop was named Snob. So the license plates were Snob 1, Snob 2, and I think there was a 3, I'm not sure, for the daughter. And when he before he and Frances were married, uh, this is a story you might have to edit, I don't know. But across from the bakery in Sioux City was another building that was connected to the bakery with a kind of a crosswalk. And at that particular time, the second floor of the building was the house of prostitution. And the females over there used to come across and come into the bakery to buy bakery goods, whatever it is, and to save them come across the alley by using the crosswalk. So we got acquainted with some of the girls, I mean, knowing them by name, and when I came to Omaha and knew he was working here for a nightclub on 24th Street, I'm sure it was called Black and White, and he was supposed to be a bartender. And I went down to see him one day, and he said, I'll be off work in about an hour. He said, why don't you go up to my apartment? My wife is there, and wait for me at the apartment, and I'll be up there. And I said, fine. So I went to his apartment, knocked on the door, and the door opens, and this female is standing there. And I looked at her, and I said, Dolly? And she said, yeah. And I said, you're Max's wife? Yeah. Well, my brother said to come up here and wait for him. She was one of the girls from the house of prostitution that were there. And the kids still get a kick out of that story because it really was funny in a way. And I don't know, in a family as big as ours was, out of the 5 boys, I was the only one originally had married a Jewish girl. Never dawned on me otherwise. The other 2 of them finally, after the first marriage, married a Jewish girl. And my brother Matt married a non-Jewish girl. Her name was Olive, and nice enough girl. She converted, but it wasn't much of a conversion. And then he married a Jewish girl after Olive died, and it was great. She was a wonderful person. But I don't know what the attraction was with any of the others. But it's one of those things that happens in families. And I think that about covers that part of it.
I want to hear now about Jean. I want to hear from the marriage on.
Well, when we were going to get married, we set the date, July 9th, 1938. And I have to say that Jean's mother was a wonderful woman. And her sister Molly, who's Molly Rimmerman, is here in the home also. And her brother Mike was a gambler. He was with the bunch that a few years ago left Omaha and went to Las Vegas. And she had another sister, Marilyn, who died quite young. And then another one that died in 1913 that unfortunately we've never been able to find her gravesite. We've looked for it, and we've tried to check records and I can't find where. But Jean was just as nice as can be. I mean, she at that time was a little bit zoftig, which was great. And at that time we lived with, we got married, and we didn't belong to a synagogue, but my sister I made arrangements with Rabbi Goldstein to be married at his home. So we piled into cars and went to the rabbi's home, where he performed the ceremony in his living room, and my mother was there, my mother-in-law, and my sister's mother-in-law, and my sister-in-law, and of course my brother-in-law and sister. And Rabbi performed the marriage, and my sister's mother-in-law said, "Where's the chuppah?" The rabbi said, "The ceiling, that's the chuppah." And I had asked Mr. Forbes, I'd take this out, I'd asked Mr. Forbes for a couple of weeks, for a so-called honeymoon. And no, 1 week. 1 week, okay, made it plain, without pay. And and of course neither Gene or I had saved that much money where we could take an extensive honeymoon of any kind. So we decided, well, since none of my family except my mother were at our wedding, we would go to Sioux City. At least we're out of Omaha. And made reservations at the Martin Hotel. And we got to Sioux City, got to the hotel, and by that time was a little late. And really, we were both tired. And we got into bed. It seemed like we no sooner got into bed and there was a knock on the door. I go to the door. Who is it? Room service. I open the door and there stands my youngest sister and my brother-in-law, Ray Friedman. "What are you doing here?" "Well, we knew where you were going to be. Aunt Zella said it was too expensive for you to stay here at the hotel. She's by herself with Florence's big house. We're supposed to take you there." And I got to stand around and argue with him, so we got packed up again and went to my Aunt Zella's house. And of course then we made the rounds of the family while we were there. Came back to Omaha, and then of course we continued our regular routine. Now I have to tell you that I was blessed with a mother-in-law like I had. When they came, we stayed with her for, I don't know, first couple of years or so. And when it came time for dinner, one thing and another, she never asked the girls, "What do you want?" She used to ask me, "Dave, what do you want for dinner?" And I told her one day I wanted a fried herring. And she said, "Fried herring? Never heard of it." And I said, "Well," we thought it was quite good. And told her how we made it, how we got the schmaltz herring and dipped it in flour, fried it in butter. Girls never could get used to it. But I loved it, and my daughter Marilyn loved it. I don't think Lois did. And so after we decided we would get out, because there was still Molly, Mike there, and we started looking for an apartment. Well, we still looking at the north side, and we had time. We had 2 or 3 different places that we moved to, one to another and then to another. And then when Jean became pregnant, we moved to the California apartments. was on 17th in California. And that's where I became acquainted with Lou Canner. He had the drugstore on the corner of 16th. And we were there until, well, I tell the story of Forbes going bankrupt and closing up. And I had one or two calls, another Jewish bakery, and I had heard too much about Mr. Fuff. And I said, no, I said, not what I'm looking for. And I finally got a call from the union secretary that they needed somebody at Interstate Bakeries. It was on 20th and Leavenworth, butternut bread. And wanted to know if I was interested, and I said, I certainly am. Well, after I got there, I found out that the job was only supposed to be good for a couple of weeks while we were on vacation. And the couple of weeks lasted into about 10 years. And I went then from working on the so-called bench, we call it, making sweet rolls and that, going to an oven man, and finally a dough mixer became available, and nobody else seemed to want the job, but it paid pretty good money, so I took it. As I said, I stayed with them for 10 years before I left the bakery. The bakery story. I must tell you that while I was working there one day, this tall, gangly guy walks by, and he's singing the Sweetheart of AZA, the song. It did quite often. I stopped him one time and I said, words similar to, how come you're always singing this song? He said, because I happen to be Jewish. And I said, I am too. And so we had a little conversation, got his name, named Norman Corney. And we became, until he died, the best of friends. And we played golf together, we picnicked together, you name it. A lot of people thought he was very, how's the word in that case, kind of obnoxious. But I thought he was the greatest guy. And as I said, we were friends until the day he died. And we remained friends with Gert, his wife. His daughter Sharon, who is married to Alvin Milder, lives in California. Whenever she comes to Omaha, never fails to stop to see me. Calls me Uncle Dave. And that was great. And anyway, I became acquainted with Obie Gonberg. Obie at that time worked for the potato market. And wasn't anything really fantastic. It just, we were acquaintances and we would talk. And I don't know how we finally got together. But at this particular time, we had moved to a triplex on South 25th Avenue, who was owned by Keith Peltz, Keith and Dorothy Peltz, who also were great friends of ours over the years. And he came over one day with his wife, and he said he was leaving the potato market. And he said he had a store in there that he wanted to buy, and wanted to know if I was willing to leave the bakery and come to the store with him. And I said, well, let's talk about it, what arrangements we can make. And he started saying, well, this and that, and he named a wage, and I said, that won't do, Obie. I said, that's not as much as I'm making right now. So he raised the ante a little bit and said, start you out at this, and in 3 years, you'll come in for a third of the profits. And I said, fine. And so I left the bakery to go to work for Obie. And I did everything at the store, everything except cut meat. And things went around great. And then after 3 years, when it came time to talk business again, I said, Obie, I said, I'm supposed to get a third of the profits. Well, I know, but we didn't make any money last year. And I said, Obie, I said, either you're lying or you don't know what's going on. And I said, I know what business you're doing. And I said, I've been part of it. Well, that was it. He wasn't making any money. So I decided then it was time to leave. And started looking around. I thought, well, I know enough if I can find a place, I'll have a grocery store of my own. So I started looking around and found that Maury Katz had a store at 16 Williams. And Maury wanted to get out. So we went up, had my wife with me, looked around. It looked pretty good, looked like he was doing a pretty good business. And got talking, and then after a period of time, I decided this is for us. Then came the part about the financing. And I thought to myself, who can I get to help? And my brother-in-law at that time, Ray Friedman, had a business in Sioux City. Ray was sharp. I called him and talked to him, told him what my plans were and what I needed. And he said, Dave, I'll come down and take a look. And so he came down here to Omaha, went in with me, took a look around. He said, I think it's a pretty good risk. So I said, come on. He said, let's go to the First National Bank. At that time, Ray was quite a businessman. Of course, over the years, especially the last couple of years, if you heard about it, by that time was out of it, the situation with an outfit called Refco in New York that the government went after. And he was the starter of that, founder of that. And so he came down, as I say, took me to the First National Bank, went in, and some things you never forget. We sat down at a desk with this guy, whose last name I remember was Voorhees. And my brother-in-law told him that he wanted to borrow X number of dollars. And this is what he wanted to do with it. And Voorhees fiddled around for a little while. And he said, I don't think it'd be a good risk. And my brother-in-law Ray said, Dave, let's get out of here. So I got up and we started walking out and went to the little swinging gate. And this one fella, an older fella came down towards the office, stopped and said, Ray, what are you doing here? My brother-in-law said, introduced me. I think his name was Davis. He was president of the bank. And my brother-in-law said, I came in here to try to arrange a loan for my brother-in-law. That guy back there turned me down flat. And he said, of all the business I'm doing with you here in Omaha, he said, I decided we'd go over to the bank across the street. That was the United State Bank or something like that, if I recall. The guy said, "Friedman, wait just a minute." And he went through the gate, went back to the desk, talked to this guy. Didn't take 5 minutes, he was back out. And he said, "Come on back." He said, "He'll take care of you." And went back in and arranged for the loan. And that's when we bought the store. And I don't know, for the first 4 years or so, I mean, it was great. We managed to pay all the bills, take care of everything. And all but my wife kept saying, "Dave, I think you're giving too much credit. I think you're giving too much credit." And I said, "Well, that's what these stores are built on, mom and pop stores." And I said, "I have been paying." He said, "Yeah, but some of them aren't paying too well." And then as time went by, Safeway was open on 13th Street, and another one on Vinton, if I recall. And I could see our customers all of a sudden are not coming in, which is okay. But the ones that weren't coming in were the ones that owed me money. And after a period of time, I said to my wife, "I guess you're right." Because what happened is that she used to go down in the morning and go to the bank and take care of bank deposit and one thing and another. And then she would come to the store and stay there all afternoon with me. And I had a butcher then. And then we would go home together. So she was really working in the store also. I mean, it wasn't that she was just talking. And so we finally decided this is it. I had become acquainted with Abe Schlaff at that time. Abe was a brother-in-law to Norm Corney. And we also became very good friends. And as things got a little tough, I used to make up a list. And I'd get in the car and drive over to Abe's store on 20th and Bristol. And, "Abe, I need this and this." And he would give me everything I wanted and at wholesale price. And I would take it back and then put it on my shelves and make a few extra dollars that way. And after that, that's when we decided that this was it. And I decided to close up. Now what are we going to do? I mean, you've got all this stock and one thing and another. And some of my friends said the only thing to do is declare bankruptcy. We said, "No, we're not going to do that." So I called all the outfits that I was doing business with, who I owed money, told them we were closing up. And I said, "I've got X number of cases of your merchandise." And I said, "If you want to pick it up, give me credit for it, we'll try to take care of the balance." And almost all of them agreed. There were a few of them that didn't. And we finally got rid of the stores. Meanwhile, Dave calls me on the phone. He said, "Dave, how about coming to work for me?" I didn't want to go to work for a small store again. And I said, "Abe," I said, "you can't afford me." He says, "What'll it take?" And to this day I say it was a ridiculous figure. I don't even remember what it was, but it's just one that popped in my head. And I said, "I need X amount of dollars. I want my groceries at cost. And I want 2 weeks of vacation." And he says, "Okay." And so I went down, see what the situation was there, what he had. The guy working for him, he told me he's a drunkard. And he said, he's costing me money. Meanwhile, I had learned how to cut meat and one thing and another. And as we were liquidating the store, he let me take all the time I need to go from his place to 16th and Williams, take care of whatever business we had. And across from the store, 16th and Williams, was a bar, Ace and Ann's. Ace Sempek. Looked like he just got out of a boxing ring. I mean, kind of heavy set, flat nose, but a wonderful guy. And a couple of times when I was running short of cash, I'd go over and I'd say, hey, Ace, I need $50 or $100, whatever it was. And he'd say to his wife, Ann, go up to the race money and take $50, $100 out. And she'd bring it down, he'd hand it to me, and of course, I always paid him back. And I had the big walk-in coolers that Mom stores had at that time. And I had put up a new awning and one thing and another. Maury Katz came in. And a couple of days before that, I went over to have a cup of coffee, and Ace said, Dave, what are you going to do with that walk-in cooler? And I said, whatever I can with it. He said, I'd like to buy it. To store my beer. And I said, okay. And he says, how much do you want for it? And I said, Ace, you got a pencil and paper? He brought a piece of paper and a pencil and had me, and I wrote on it, sold to Ace Sempek, one walk-in cooler for 1 cent. And signed it and gave it to him. He said, cheap. Well, he did me plenty of papers when I needed it. And if he didn't take it, I don't know who would. So he was there with his brother tearing the walk-in cooler apart when Maury Katz walked in. What are you doing? I told him. I said, I sold this to Ace. You can't do that. That's part of the building, because he owned the building at that time. And I said, well, yes, I can. And he said, no, you can't. That's part of the building. And I said, let me show you something. And I had the papers out, and I showed him. I said, here's the bill of sale that you gave me. And you charged me for this walk-in cooler. So the walk-in cooler is mine. And the awning is mine. And he had nothing to say about that, so, he let it go at that. And they tore that walk-in cooler out. And then after that, he took the awning down and left the building completely empty. And I went to work for Abe. And I was with him for almost 30 years. I never had to ask him for a raise in wages. I never asked him for anything. I was my own boss. I ran the meat counter. I ordered the meat. And I did all the cutting and everything else. And the only thing he did with the meat counter was pay the bills. And he still comes up to see me here. We've remained friends for all these years, even after I left, and my wife retired from Sears. She went to work for Sears after we closed up. She was with them for about 21 years, and she retired. And then when she turned 63, I think it was, she decided she would take her Social Security. I said, honey, you're going to be back. I said, no, I won't. Well, as a couple of years went by, and by the way, my wife was 3 years older than me, and she didn't hesitate telling anyone. And she didn't hesitate telling anyone that I asked her to marry me. And I saw how she was enjoying the retirement, and thought, well, if she's enjoying it that much, maybe I'll try it. So at 62, I took my Social Security. And first thing we did, when I left Dave, we had gotten in with the old timers here at the JCC. And I finally was treasurer of the old timers for 6 years. And Molly was arranging a trip to Israel. And I told my wife, I said, you know, we really haven't been any place except Lake Okoboji. And I said, I'd like to take a trip to Israel. And she said, okay. So we took the trip with Molly Delman. As a matter of fact, Sally Wenger was with us, and Sally kept a journal, and she had me, and my brother-in-law Elmer was with us, and somebody else write little articles, and then she put it in the cover, and gave us each a copy. Had all the things we did in Israel. I mean, I turned that over to the Historical Society just last week, because I had found it down there with some of the other stuff I had. And then we started travel with Molly. And finally we took a cruise. And we started going, oh my gosh, we went to Kansas City and St. Louis so many times with Molly, to Chicago. We took a bus trip all through the South. We went to the Catskills with her twice, 3 times. We went up to Canada with her, and we just traveled all over with Molly and the group, and it was great. And after we got back, Diamond had a store on North 30th Street. Got the North Side Produce, whatever it was, with Harvey Lipsman. And he called me, wanted to know if I'd go to work for him part-time. And I told him, I said, we'll come in and talk about it. And I said, well, I'll go work for you part-time. I said, I will not work on Mondays, or Tuesdays rather, or on weekends. And I think I went to work for 4 hours a day for him. And Tuesdays were out because that was our old timers meeting day. And I was with him for several months. And finally I said to him one day, I said, oh, Oscar, I said, it's not worth it. I said, there's not enough for me to do here. I can drive all the way down here, and I'm here for 4 hours. I spend most of my time back in the other room drinking coffee and smoking a cigarette. And I said, this doesn't pay for me, and it doesn't pay for you. And so that was the last of my work. And from then on, I mean, we enjoyed the family. I mean, which is the greatest thing I ever found out. Well, in closing, I have to tell you a little about my immediate family. I have 2 daughters, Marilyn Warren, Lois Epstein. Marilyn lives in St. Louis now. They went to transferred out of Omaha about 18 years ago. Marty is retired from Dillard's as a men's buyer. Marilyn does not want to retire from her job at one of the temples in St. Louis. She loves it too much. They have 2 sons, Mark and Mitchell. Mark is the older of the 2 sons, and both Mark and Mitchell graduated from the University of Wisconsin. Mark is more interested in finances. Mitchell interested in people. Mitchell, when he graduated with one of Times 100 students, Phi Beta Kappa, and lives in Nyack, New York now after a stint in South Africa and in London, and he's involved with an outfit called AVAC, which is interested in the AIDS and is partly financed by the Gates Foundation. Mark and his finances, I believe, was involved in real estate investment, and at 40-something now, claims he's retired and playing golf, which he'll never do. They have a daughter, Rachel, and a son, Benjamin. And his wife, Barbara, is very well. She has a business of her own in cashmere wear, and they're all doing so very, very well. Lois and Mel have just celebrated their 40th anniversary, and they have done wonders as far as I'm concerned. Mel is now with an insurance company, has been for several years, chief operating officer, and Lois works there as secretary for B'nai B'rith. And I have to say that both sons-in-law, if I had to pick them, I couldn't do any better. And with the daughters, God bless them. I think if I could have had a couple more, it would be just like them, I would be happy with it. Neither one have ever given me or my wife 1 minute's problem. We never worried about where they were going, who they were going with, what they were going to do, or what time they came home. We never had a curfew for them. I don't know what I would do without either one of them. I could call Lois any time of the day or night, and I could call Marilyn the same way. We talk on the phone every day of the week, even when they're out of town. And Mitchell and his wife Alice have a son, Luke, and a daughter, Sarah. Luke will be bar mitzvahed in October, which would be great. I wish my health were such that I could be there with him. But God willing, he'll use my tallis in a ceremony, and I'll have a tape of that, so I'll be there. Sarah is a sweetheart. She's just a love bug. And they call quite often. Mitchell calls whenever he can because he does a lot of traveling yet. Mark calls me an average once or twice a week, and just inquire my health. Then we get down to the grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, I should say. That was Luke and Sarah. And, of course, the great-grandchildren of Mark's is Benjamin and Rachel. And with Lois and Mel, as I say, I couldn't do any better if I picked them. Randy is the oldest granddaughter, and she's married to Michael. And they have the 3 girls. Randy, who is the oldest. Randy has Rebecca, Jacob, and Zachary. And we keep in touch very often. And then after Randy comes Robin, who's also a sweetheart. Robin and Will have just moved from Cedar Rapids, Iowa to St. Louis. And they're so happy to be there with Randy and their Auntie Em and I talk to her quite often, and they are so happy to be back in St. Louis. Then we come to Ricky and Lalone. They have 3 daughters. They have Yarden and Maya, who are twins. And then there is Tali, who is the boss of the family. And after Ricky and Alone were married, Alone wanted to return to Israel, and they left and were gone for almost, I don't know, 4 or 5 years before they came back to the States, which was such a happy day. And they now live in Denver. And I mentioned before, we decided 1 and 1 can make more than 2. In our case, 1 and 1 make 25. And to all of you, I'd say you're my family. I love you all, and be family to each other. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to leave you out, but also in Robin's family are Benjamin and Jonah, and their pictures are plastered all over my little refrigerator. The others I don't have because they're all in my desk, but I'm sorry, I didn't forget your names. I forgot you. And if you also notice, the names of all the great-grandchildren are from the Bible. Once again, love you all.